It's Mike Callahan. I'm the director of the Internship and Career Management Center here at the College of Business and have the pleasure of being the MC for today's event. These executive speaker series have been going on for quite some time. We were just talking about it in the green room, and it actually, I think it was 2008 when the first sessions got started, so we've been doing it for 11 years. And I've had the privilege of helping Dr. Green with a few of them, and then also being a member of the audience. And I'm really happy to be able to introduce the program today to you and tell you about the topic. I'd like to start off by recognizing Comcast. They're the sponsor of today's event. Unfortunately, they had a situation come up, and the person who's going to come talk to you a little bit about them isn't able to make it. But I know we all know about Comcast and who they are, and just glad to be able to recognize and acknowledge them to be the supporters of today's event. I mentioned that I'm the Internship and Career Development Director for the College of Business. Essentially, we're involved in helping COB students develop, get ready for their careers, prepare for their careers, do internships, and then ultimately launch their career. The topic that we're talking about today, the demand for talent in this area is continuing to grow. And for those of you who are thinking about careers and getting ready to launch your career, there's a lot I think you're going to pick up today from the panel and also just from the whole conversation that we have, because it's obviously a very critical area and lots of opportunities in that criticality. I see some of my students, so glad you're here. Last year, just to give you some statistics and data about cybersecurity, last year 330 million Twitter users had their accounts hacked. So, you know, if you're out there using Twitter, you're out there using LinkedIn, Facebook, be careful about what you're putting out there. It's going to get hacked. It's public knowledge, and we need to use it. We advise students to have LinkedIn profiles. I have a LinkedIn profile. It's used and it's needed, but you don't want to be putting your social security numbers out there or data that could be potentially compromising. So be smart about it. Twitter's CEO, Jack Dorsey, had his account hacked even in that process. So from individuals to mass data breaches, cybercrime is prolific. You can't go a day without hearing about something getting hacked. It takes U.S. businesses about 196 days on average to recognize and identify that they've been hacked. So even once they figure it out, it's 2/3 of a year have gone by, and you can imagine the kind of damage that can be done with data that gets out there. So again, you want to be cautious about this. The federal government spent over $15 billion on cybercrime prevention, and they're expecting that by the year 2023, over 33 billion stolen records will occur in the United States. 33 billion stolen records. The size of that just blows your mind when you think about it. So what we're going to do today is we're bringing this panel together to discuss the future of cybercrime and what companies can do to mitigate the risk. We were talking about it in the prep room or the green room before, and it's all about risk management. That's really the key. How do you avoid the exposure, and how do you manage your risk? And it's stuff that really needs to be focused on and pay attention to. So what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists, and then each of them will come up, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Green, and he'll begin the session and the logistics. We do have the option for you that you notice on your chairs. There's an index card, and so during the presentation, if anyone says something and you got a question on it and you want to go a little bit deeper, you can fill that out, and then Dr. Green will moderate that. And then also, the panelists, some of them will be available. Some of them got to go catch a flight. Brett's got to take off and go. Where are you going? California? Yeah, where it's nice, warm. But some of them will be around. Or you can follow up with them. Send them a LinkedIn connection, right? You guys are all on LinkedIn, right? No? Are you? Okay. So anyway, let me introduce the panelists. Brett is the first one. Brett Holk, he's a cybersecurity expert. He's got 20 years leadership experience in large and mid-sized organizations. He coordinated the response to one of the largest data breaches in corporate history. He's grown his 65-member staff to over 300 employees in less than 3 years. So the magnitude of one organization having 300 people focusing on cybercrime is really, really amazing. He's recognized as an industry leader and shares his experience as a speaker in international cybersecurity conferences. So welcome, Brett. Cindy James, 32 years of experience working in the IT industry. She's presently Vice President of Networks and IT Security at DFCU Financial, where she's built her team security program from the ground up. She's got a very strong understanding of cybersecurity, along with credit union needs, because there's some unique challenges in that environment. And she's got a vision for future opportunities. With the board level experience and all that she has, she definitely has a passion for interpersonal coaching, and she loves bringing teams together to enhance organizational security. So welcome, Cindy. Scott Maxwell, he's a director of business development for Focal Point, where he supports enterprise accounts in the Midwest with innovative cybersecurity, data privacy, and governance solutions. He's got more than 20 years of experience in technology, specializing in network, cloud, identity-based security. And prior to joining Focal Point, Scott served in several capacities at Cisco, and we've all heard of Cisco, very well-known company in the industry, and most recently as a security account manager there. He worked with some of the largest companies in the world to address the evolving security risks, and he also has a sales leadership role at RSA Security. So thank you for coming and welcome. And then last but not least is Dennis Neal. He leads the strategic efforts to the identification, selection, and architecting of UM information technology services, so one of the University of Michigan's leaders. And in addition to that, he manages teams and oversees vulnerability management, penetration testing, and risk assessment activities. So welcome, Dennis. So that's our panelists, and we're all, I know, looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Just a little bit that I've had a chance to meet you is really interesting, so it's fun. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Green. Dr. Green is the officially the Zarnicki Professor of Accounting, director and moderator of the Executive Speaker Series. He's my friend. He's actually had me over to his house a few times for Christmas, and we have a little bit of fun time together. And so I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Green and turn it over to him. Thank you.
I'm just glad he stopped the Christmas party stories short. Welcome. Yeah, a little bad weather out there and a little bad traffic out there, I hear. Yeah, this has been about 11 years now, and we did some interviews and surveys of business leaders of what they want to see, and this was their #1 topic. So lots of work to do for you guys. Just in the past 5 years, what has been some of the most effective cyber attacks that you've seen? What kind of techniques have been used in the past 5 years against companies, other organizations, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit?
I think, I'll start it. That goes back to fundamentally phishing, right? 90+% of all attacks start with something as simple as an email or some type of message or something that gets you to take action of some nature, whether it's sending information, clicking on something, bringing something into your organization or whatever. So to me, that is still first and foremost the front line of a majority of what you're seeing on cyber attacks, my perspective.
I agree with that statement, and I think that looking for the common things that we've been taught along the way, as far as flaws in emails, the misspellings or coming from a different country, those kinds of things, they're getting very good at making an email look real, and so it's becoming harder and harder to identify a phishing email versus a real email, and then helping our employees try to figure out which one is which.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my story. I might steal thunder from later. This probably was about 4 or 5 years ago. Was at an event, and the Chief Information Security Officer of Kroger Corporation, very large grocery chain, shared the story. He had a friend of his who was an executive in a financial services organization. As best they can tell, this all started because someone befriended his wife on Facebook, used Facebook to watch the family, learn about them, because again, they were targeting this gentleman and his role within this financial services organization. They waited till about the middle of January, and they sent a perfectly crafted email. Again, it wasn't the Nigerian prince, it wasn't bad spelling and all those types of easy grammatical things that most of us find. Perfectly crafted email that said, if this gentleman, for example, his name was Tony, hey Tony, your son and daughter are at X school, and because of today's pending snowstorm, your children are going to be getting out of school early. Please see the attached document that gives you a rolling schedule of when you can expect and need to come to pick up your children. And at this point, Brian stopped, and it was probably about a room of 400 or 500 people, and he looked at the room and he said, which one of us doesn't open that email? We all do. And so that obviously was a phishing attack, a spear phishing, very targeted, delivered the payload, and I forget the exact dollar amount, but ended up costing that financial services organization to the tune of over a couple $100,000s. But again, it's not always the incredibly obvious. They're getting very talented. Again, the good guys adapt us as the good guys have to continue to evolve our strategies, and a lot of it begins with awareness. The weakness in many of this system is this fleshy substance that sits with fingers on the keyboard. And so, yeah, phishing, without question, again, as a simple example.
Yeah, and you know, at risk of disagreeing with, not necessarily, with everything that was said, I agree. Phishing is probably one of the big threats that we've seen. I'd like to add that, you know, things like unpatched vulnerabilities and compromising basic gaps in good security operations is something that we've seen taken advantage of and is relatively straightforward to address. So I just want to throw that out there as something we see pretty commonly.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to your point, and again, there's no one Achilles heel for all of us. The system sprawl, the tool sprawl, again, I know we'll get into this later, the lack of talent and organizational people to come in. Again, you can read the various studies. We all estimate by 2022 there's 1 million, 2 million. Again, the numbers vary, but in a significant shortage of talented and qualified and educated cyber professionals. So, but yeah, without question, I agree with you.
And a talented or a knowledgeable workforce
Yes,
that is
yes,
aware
absolutely.
of the kinds of risks, because
Absolutely.
these phishing attacks are just getting more sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what you'll find too is with the talent up here at this table, we have different focuses, and none of it is wrong. It's just right for our company and where we're at the time. My company is actually really tiny compared to these guys, and so my concerns are the same, but at a different scale.
Yep.
And so
Right.
we'll give you different answers, but it's from a different perspective.
Yep.
How have, up to this point, how have organizations responded to these type of threats and in a way of improving their effectiveness of stopping these, the phishing or anything else? How do they go about trying to stop this?
For me, it's awareness with the people and layered protection throughout the technology pieces. So you could have 5 different things that'll try and catch an email, and they actually click on it and that macro lights up, and then you've got something on the workstation that's catching it. But if you didn't have all those different pieces in place, it may just go right through and become a problem. So there's all different layers. They fit together like a puzzle, and then you've just got to hope that if someone does click on that, you've got a piece in place that'll catch it.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on exactly that, you assume any layer can be compromised. I mean, it's almost a given that I could compromise or find a way to compromise any layer, but you stack a sufficient number up that it's very difficult to navigate through undetected. Right, everything's potentially navigable, but undetected is the key piece. So it's what, to the earlier comment on vulnerability management, it's what can you prevent? The best risks are the ones you can make go away by patching a system or applying an update, and what you can't prevent, right, you've got to protect against. and put some protection, whether it's anti-malware, it's phishing, filtering, whatever those things are. Those things that you're trying to protect, but you can't always ensure that it's going to be 100% accurate. You're then into the, you're detecting. How do I detect when something happens in that event, and then ideally disrupting it before it causes damage, right? So to me, it's those layers of how do you go into that world of protecting the organization. It's if you're dependent upon this will fix it. If anybody comes in and tells you this will fix or this will prevent,
The
don't believe
silver bullet.
yeah,
We're looking
exactly.
for
Yeah.
the silver
Yeah,
bullet.
except for Cisco. No, but there's those pieces you get. It takes a multitude. No single thing will ever solve anything.
So the way I used to describe, especially no offense to any C-level titles in the room, but to the C-level folks again who don't and didn't. This is probably 10 years ago. They're a little more educated now. But think about a moment about how security works, right? And so the analogy I used to use was think about your home, your apartment, wherever you live, right? We all have things inside of our home that we want to protect, our family, pictures, money, whatever it happens to be. So we all have assets, we all have data, just like organizations and networks do. And so we all take steps to help protect our home. We have doors. Well, is that just a door? No, the door has a lock on it. But do we stop there? No. Why? Because we all know that doors and locks are fallible. You can kick it in, you can pick it. Maybe somebody forgets to lock the lock. You don't use the tool you have. So we all naturally have these layers of defense for our homes. We have doors, we have windows, we have locks. Maybe we have a dog that barks. Maybe we put a fence up. We have motion lights. We have an alarm system. Maybe you have a bat or a gun. We all have insurance policies. We all call the police. So you have these layers of defense. And if you think about those things, you can kind of break them into the category of things that protect you, things that detect if a protection layer has broken down, and then you have your response. Again, hopefully it's a biting dog and not a barking dog. Mine will just lick you to death. They sound mean. But again, you take a minute and you really think about how security and again in your everyday life works. It's the same type of methodology for an organization, for a company trying to protect the people, the assets, the data that's on their organization. And it's this defense in depth that you have to build to, because there is no silver bullet. There's no one thing you can buy and all of a sudden job's done, world's great, let's go play around with golf.
Yeah, so when I think of the question at its core, how has industry responded, from my standpoint, one of the big business drivers that I try to support is having and supporting an environment of open collaboration and communication. And so what I've seen in the industry, and it's just a reflection, it doesn't mean any of the industries here, is that we've started making things very complex, and which isn't always promoting good security. So we try to rely on things, same as everything that was said at the table, to think holistically, obviously, but also to focus on shared responsibilities, because we recognize that no matter how much we secure in the environment, there's, as you move up the stack from hardware through operating systems and applications and so forth, you have this thing at the top called the user, and no matter what you do, all those good things you do can still be undermined by someone who may not know what the right thing to do is. So we've tried to focus in that space, but yeah, I totally agree with everything that was brought up as a strategy.
All I can think of is, your worst scenario, your weakest link. The weakest link is the user, and I look around the people working with me and going, who would be the weakest link? Is that on film? Oh, damn. Okay.
Let that out.
Looking towards the future, how have things changed in the past 5 years? And where do you think it's going as far as cybercrime and how they're going to attack? What weaknesses will they attack in the future? Where are we going with this?
So I'll offer that I think one thing to remember is, and I've kind of already said this, but that a lot of this relies on doing the basics well. So a lot of things that are going to be compromised are unpatched vulnerabilities, definitely phishing. It's probably the largest. But also weak or reused passwords, right? So as you focus on these kinds of things causing IT security incidents, it reminds us all that it's important to get everyone involved in good cybersecurity awareness, operations, to do all the right things when we're supporting systems to make sure that we can avoid what we kind of already know to be the basic threats that are out there and risks, and to do all the right things on a consistent basis to make sure that we're properly communicating where risk resides so that the organization can make decisions based on transparency.
Yes, I believe, we're going to see more and more in this, and from a business perspective, in the supply chain. Early on, things come at the front door. If you come into firewalls, those get put up to protect you. Try to go into remote access. If you go back 5-10 years ago, then it's starting in the supply side now, even the suppliers of suppliers, right? So if I want to get into a large financial institution, it's going to be very difficult to go at them directly. They have a lot of protections in place, thousands of people defending the organization in some of these large companies. But in the supply chain, who has access on some level through, the Trojan horse, I'm coming not in the technology Trojan horse, but in just, I'm following in behind somebody else looking like I'm authorized to be in. How do I get past the guards at the gate, if you will? And so that concept of you can't trust much of anything, right? And so that on the business side, I'll say that. On the personal side, I've had this conversation with my daughter a lot recently around, I think one of the biggest challenges her generation will face is really understanding what is the truth. And then it's going to be very difficult to trust your eyes, your ears, the people around you, the things you see, the things you receive. We're going to, she'll grow up in a world that's naturally skeptical, but very difficult to even believe, your eyes, where we can always rely on that. If you go back 5 years, your eyes were pretty accurate and rarely deceived when you're watching something either live or simulated live on a video or something. That gets harder and harder as the world goes forward in the next 5 years, I think. And I think that's going to be a challenge on a number of fronts in society.
I think the other aspect that we'll continue to challenge and work through, again, we've all heard of the idea of Internet of Things. Everything is connected. The lights are connected. The microphones are connected. The chairs become connected. And just that proliferation, again, you look at any small to large organization and the number of devices and things that are on the network is a challenge. And again, when you start working through the process, to protect your data, you have to first of all know where the data is, and to know where the data is, you have to know all the things that are connected to your network. So this explosion in this world of IoT, and obviously we're all carrying mobile devices, but I think that will continue to be, and it is, and will continue to be an avenue of exploitation. Again, you now have 1 million more things on the network that you need to patch and worry about. So I think that will be another avenue that we'll all continue to have to adapt and grow as everything around us is now connected.
But, I kind of think of that as the good news, in that when we think about these kinds of devices, we can use the same rules we've used in the past to apply to it. It's just increasing the workload.
Yeah, increasing the workload.
Yeah, the amount of patching that we've had to do in the last 5 years is just incredible, and I don't see that changing going forward. And to your point about the truth, that is going to be I think the single most difficult thing in the future, is being able to tell whether something you are being told is really true or not, because your eyes can be deceived by the technologies that they're using now.
You brought up the concept of zero trust. And I know here at the university we've gone through some changes with a dual recognition system. And we've also talked about how many different groups are interacting with your information system. For example, here at the university, we have faculty, we have students, we have donors, we have advisory boards, obviously vendors. With all that access to organizations' information systems, how do you protect against that? And how do you go about verifying that the people you're talking to are actually the people you're talking to? What are some other things you do?
Well, I'll lead off. I think, to kind of my earlier comment, it all starts from a data governance program. You have to understand what the data is, where the data resides. Then you can start to determine, okay, on a kind of role-based access, if you will, who should have access to that data. Again, should a contractor coming in to service my HVA system be able to talk to my ATM if I'm a financial services institution? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. But there are always those fundamental steps that until you understand what you have, where it resides, understand who should have access to it, then you can start to build a program, use technologies such as, again, dual factor, strong factor, multi-factor authentication to start to prove who that person is that they are, say they are, and then be able to your comment, build that idea of zero trust. Is the room generally familiar with the term zero trust? Is that generally, okay, good. So otherwise we can have a quick discussion of exactly what it means.
I think from a personal standpoint, I just want you to consider your own point of view, not just from a corporate point of view, because when we're in the financial industry, we're seeing hackers, people calling our customers, and they're actually walking them through the multi-factor process to get the one-time password to get in and change their account information. So you have to be aware, if someone calls you and says, what's your password, or I'm from the credit union and I'd like this information, I'd like to help you, your account's been hacked, we have to walk through some steps to help you. If they're asking you for your password, if they're walking you through the multi-factor authentication, you should have red flags going up and saying something is not right. And don't be afraid to shut that person down. That's the biggest thing. In this day and age, we like to be kind and helpful and be able to go with the flow, but at the same time, that can get us in trouble. And so go ahead, shut that person down, and then call the phone number you know and ask them, what's going on here? I was told my account was hacked, and they'll verify whether it was or not.
I was talking to one of the panelists, and one of the things that came up was open source. As far as open source software goes, and we have companies that have adopted open source software. What kind of risk does that open up for a company, and how do you do to protect you? What do you do to protect yourself?
I'll speak at a high level. I mean, I think from my standpoint, it's which do you trust more or less, right? Do you trust big tech, or do you trust the herd, right? And I think there are reasons you should or shouldn't trust both, and I think so. It's like we just talked about zero trust, right? I everything has potential value to me. Just because it's open doesn't make it bad. It actually may be much better in many ways because it's actually been validated and reviewed by a number of different independent people and parties, and so that can be a very good thing. Just because it's provided by a company doesn't make it good. We've got a multitude of examples of that in the last several months here. So I think it goes back to that natural skepticism, natural validation that you've got to have in place, and to say I don't trust anything someone tells me or anything someone gives me, be it open or be it being sold to me. I run it through my own checks for vulnerabilities. I look for my own type of tests that I run against it in validation of some level. So I apply to my company the same beliefs we talk about just applying to the corporate side. I don't assume because you're giving it to me, I know you're a nice person, but that doesn't mean I just naturally trust it. I won't just plug it into my network and let it run.
I think from my standpoint, we don't adopt open source as a rule in my company, but what we end up seeing is that I buy a product from someone to use, for instance, a telephone banking product, and I'm not saying that it is, I'm just saying that there might be pieces in the product that we buy that are open source. And so it goes back to the basics, like Dennis said. You gotta watch your patching, do your vulnerability testing, look for those things that can cause you trouble, and then go back and patch them up.
Okay. I'm sorry, I just went gone on that one. I started thinking about what you were saying. I forgot. Oh yeah, I have to have a question now, don't I? We look at various sizes of organizations, from very large to very small. Are the security concerns different for a smaller organization and a larger organization? Are there different risks they're facing, or is it a commonality? And if you are a smaller organization, especially with less resources, how do you go about improving protecting your information?
Yeah, so everybody looks at the person from the university. So I'm reminded that we're a $9 billion entity, so we may not be small necessarily. But when I think of the kinds of risks that a small organization might have, it's kind of all the obvious things. I think the threats that would be seen are pretty much the same. I think it's based on the type of data or services that the organization might offer. But I'm also thinking about how small organizations might have a harder time actually promoting the value of the security program, getting the appropriate budget, and retaining or attracting and retaining top talent. So I think of those things, but I think as far as the risks themselves, I think a lot of them are the same. It's just based on where you are in your particular market and the types of data that you may host. So again, it goes back to a lot of those basics, understanding the cybersecurity field, what you need to do to appropriately secure your environment, and committing resources. So, in a smaller organization, it's even more important to get all of your IT staff and all of your users trained up and understanding what their responsibilities are so they can help the program holistically.
So I agree with you. I would add on a couple things. So while the risks are generally the same from size perspective, and again, there are some nuances there, I think part of it too, if you look at it from the compliancy side, which we haven't touched on yet, definitely has its own nuances. So again, whether you're in the healthcare field and things such as HIPAA and PCI, a lot of the new privacy regulations, so the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, for example, if you do business with anyone from the state of California, you now have obligations to be able to disclose what kind of information you collect, what you do with that person's information, international versions of that for GDPR. So I think the privacy aspect anymore is almost as I want to say as big of an issue, but ties into cyber probably more so in the last 2 to 3 years than historically did, and again brings that compliance world into play regardless of whether you're a small, medium, or a large business.
And I've had this conversation with, I've worked in very, very large Fortune 50 organizations, but also have had several conversations with smaller entities and smaller companies. And the conversation you would have, go back 2 years ago, is always the, who cares, right? I run whatever business, I manufacture things. It's small. I make, the clips that go on pins that go in your pocket. So nobody cares. So if they want to commit my data, I don't care, let them have it. And the interesting thing is the criminal underworld that exists on the internet figured out who actually did care, who actually does want that. It turns out you need that data to run your business. And so that's where ransomware took off. They found that for small businesses, these enterprises, not only are they vulnerable, that they were very much in a world where they needed their data. Nobody else cares. You couldn't sell it to the world. Nobody would ever buy that data off you for any money. But it turns out the company would buy it off you because they need to keep their operations running and not go out of business. And so I think the challenges there are not so much around, if you're regulated, you've got things to do, but if you're a smaller entity, it's very important to understand what that risk profile looks like, because a disruption or an issue or an event, the odds of going out of business go up dramatically for a small company. And so being able to protect against that, this isn't a matter of losing a few dollars, this is very much a matter of survivability, and the number of days or hours you're out, that risk goes up on a hockey stick. I mean, there's a lot of risk of going out of business after those things for small companies. That's very unfortunate. You hate to see someone have that type of disruption, but surviving like what the city of Atlanta went through for a small enterprise is extremely difficult. How long can you go without revenue? How much can you spend to rebuild? How much does that cost? What protections do you have? Those types of things.
Very true. One thing that's changed for us with cybersecurity and the things that are happening is we used to write our own code. We used to be able to do things, customize our programs, do those things for ourselves, and we can no longer do that because we can't keep up with the changes in the industry and what people want from us, but we also can't keep up with the amount of security that needs to be built around that platform. And so a lot of times we end up going to a SaaS model where we're purchasing it from a third party, but now our risk model changes and we've got to be able to ensure that our data is safe with somebody else, and that becomes very difficult.
You talked a little about ransomware. Is the ransomware problem expanding? And how can you protect yourself? And if you are a victim of ransomware, or before it happens, how do you keep from being a victim of ransomware? I mean, back in the, literally, about to date myself, back in the late 60s, early 70s, people talked about, off-site data. And then later on, they talked about backup data that's not on the system. Although back in the late 60s, early 70s, the problem came in is, wow, it takes a long time. We could never catch up. With technology today, we probably could catch up.
Oh, yeah.
But has that increased as far as compartmentalizing your data away from the system? Is there a way to physically limit access that companies are doing now to prevent being victims of ransomware? What are they doing right now?
Let's say I'll jump in. Coming from Cisco, this was for 14 years was an area we did a lot on. So again, the opening answer to the question, just again, while ransomware specific, malware, all things bad, it takes the defense in depth approach. It takes user awareness. It takes all those tools, people, process, and technology. One key aspect, and we were talking about this a little bit over dinner last night, is in the industry the idea of segmentation. So again, you have to run pretty much under the auspice of it's not if someone's going to get in, it's when. It's just the inevitable reality. I think Mike asked the question this morning, is there such a thing as I can put something out online and have 100% guarantee, and that was the word that was used, was guarantee that it's secure, and the answer is no. The only guarantee is it will eventually be exposed. It's just a question of when, where, and how. So you have to run under that auspice somewhat of we're going to have something bad happen to us. And so it's that idea of how do you minimize the risk, how do you minimize the impact. And again, one of the industry trends over the last few years at the core networking side of many organizations is the idea of segmentation. Let's not have this big open called flat network where anybody can and everybody can talk to everything. Again, it gets back to that idea of role-based access control, that based on your person, even the machine you're on, is that a U of M issued laptop versus me coming in as a guest? Should I have the same rights and privileges and be able to see the same data? But start to divide up, segment the network so that if and when something does bad get in, a malware, NotPetya, those types of things, that it doesn't have full reign to the network. And again, Brett, maybe this is a good spot for you to jump in and tell your story of the evolution of that, but start to compartmentalize the network and where data resides so that you minimize the impact. So we want to talk about submarines.
I mean, we did, yeah, exactly. This is an interesting thing. This fundamental problem isn't unique, and so I'll pivot a little bit here. It isn't unique just to technology. It isn't unique to security. It's existed through all time, right? We congregate in cities, so we build walls around the city to protect ourselves. But we want to trade with another partner city next door, so we start to build gates in the city. We put guards at the gate. And we realize a few years down the road that half the people in our city don't live in our city anymore, and now we don't feel security, and things are still continuing to disappear, so we build bank vaults in the middle of those cities. And so the concept of what you think of as like a submarine, and then so to your point, if I can lose a system and it gets encrypted, but not the entire network because it's been segmented, that's the concept of a submarine. You can lose a compartment, shut it off, and not everybody in the ship sinks to the bottom of the ocean. And so we start down that path, but then as well, that also fails. People have to move in between those things, and a lot of things are traversed on a regular basis. So you get back to that, what are those core pieces that are valuable? And it's a very tough conversation to say, where am I at? And so as you get into this other world, which is everything's open, everything's untrusted, but you've got to protect your core nuggets with, be it encryption, be it those other technologies. It's a really fundamentally interesting question. How do you protect your data? And then also, from my standpoint, if you're in an organization, if you haven't had that worst case scenario drill, if you're in a school, in an elementary school, you've practiced for tornadoes or practiced for fire drills and all those types of things. The worst possible time to prepare for a breach and to respond to a breach is in a breach. Right? That's the last thing you want to fundamentally do. How do you get ahead of that conversation? How do you prepare for those bad days? I think the stat companies have been compromised for several months before they realize it. Another interesting statistic that came out, and you can look up, Horizon Data Breach Report, Quantum Institute has some really great stats here. companies that extract the attacker within 30 days have 1/3 the less cost associated with that potential breach. The only way you get someone out in 30 days is because you have a well thought out plan that you practice and work for. If you're building on the fly, the hours and days will just fly by before you ever have a chance to get ahead of that and actually figure out how you're going to respond. Because while they're running a play, I mean, for Michigan, right? While you're running a play on the football field, you can't be standing on the sideline diagramming out what you're going to do, because they'll be long down the field and you'll be trying to chase the entire way. You've got to figure out how to do that ahead of time.
I think the coach for Michigan does that, actually. I don't think there's a plan there.
Don't tell the Ohio guy.
A lot of companies, a few years back, and the university, and looking at cost savings, we're opening it up, say, bring your personal device to work, to use at work. How is that still an increasing practice, and how does that affect your vulnerabilities? You just multiply the number of access points you have. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen in the pipeline, but the highest risk areas are the one end or the other, rarely in between. How do you protect that end when we're using personal devices at work? Not on my list, but I just thought of this. Sorry.
Well, I mean, one thing that we try to think of here is this is an open environment intended to promote collaboration. So these are the kinds of things that we do have to actually support and recognize, and go back to the same kind of approach, which is to understand what the risk is, and apply principle of least privilege, as we were talking about ransomware. It also made me think about, not only is it network segmentation, it's just doing all the right things and giving people only access to the data that they need. It's the same kind of situation in this case. If you have personally owned devices on the network, to ensure that you know exactly what they're allowed to access and what the security posture of those devices is, to go in informed.
Yeah, so I've seen this play out in many different ways for organizations. Some on one extreme end, yes, you can bring your device, you can connect it, but you're going to connect it only to our guest network, which basically means it's just there for internet access. So if you want to check Facebook on your phone, you can do that. So that's kind of the one extreme, which again, for the most part, they take no liability for the device. It's not accessing any corporate, any network data. It's just, yeah, we'll let you connect on our guest Wi-Fi to get out to the internet. On the other end of the spectrum, and Cisco was this way, it was very much an encouraged BYOD. But in order to do so, there was a stack of technology. So again, a mobile device manager that would get deployed to that phone. They had the ability to remotely wipe the phone. It enforced a PIN. It enforced full disk encryption. Again, full set of controls that if you're going to be able to have customer or corporate information on the device, that was kind of at the other end of the extreme. And again, I've seen everything from both sides.
Mm-hmm. It goes back to the layers and the patching and the basics.
Mm-hmm. Blocking, attack.
And I want to follow up, at least for those of you affiliated with the university, that we do have an SPG 60133 that talks about mobile devices and exactly what they're allowed to be used for and so forth. So we try to provide as much guidance as we can to folks so that they go in aware.
Back in the 80s, the internet was a blue screen with a dot, because I used it back then. Using an FTP to send a document across to a friend of mine, and not using mail, physical mail, was just really unique. It's kind of a little complex since then. From writing your own FTP to now this. But with social media, there are hackers out there that are very good at targeting social media. We had a situation at one of the local hospitals that a person had a very bad day at work, came home and posted about the bad day at work, and that was a start to something. What are some things that hackers look for in social media posts, especially when someone is doing social media posts, video or pictures from the workplace? What are some of the things they're looking for, and how can they use that against a company?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the beautiful thing is all these wonderful devices people carry around. If they don't connect to your network, they still have a very high resolution camera. And if you picture any desk or any work environment, the amount of sensitive data, potentially private data, protected data in some way that might be visible, that your badge can get a really good picture and read of what that badge looks like from a picture online. So I think, being conscious of what's in the picture, what's around the picture, we've incorporated that, and some of the companies have been that into actual annual employee training and awareness. To say, hey, think about what's there, think about what's around, think about what might be visible, and it's never typically one picture and you're done. It's you talked about the profile earlier from Facebook. It's a combination of things over time that build a profile, and so I think that gets into, whether it's a spear phishing attack, imagine what that might be if I've got more and more information about you, what I can see on your desk, what I can see on your computer screen behind you, that with that 14 megapixel whatever camera, I can zoom in and read every last line on that. That's a very sensitive thing. That's a very risky thing potentially to put out there online that you would have never intended. And it's often not intentional, very much inadvertent, and those types of things, that type of exposure.
Right. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
To your point, just little pieces, you're building a case. If I'm thinking of it from a hacker standpoint, I'm going to want to get to know that person. I'm going to want to know everything about them. I might want to be able to guess their passwords or find out what would entice them to open an attachment that I send to them. So I'm going to look at pictures on their desktops. I'm going to, learn the names of their children, learn when their children were born, learn what political party they're voting for. Looking for any kind of input to where I can social engineer more information out of the person, because the worst thing that we do is we get comfortable with someone we don't know, and then we start giving up more and more information. That just gives them tools to get in.
It's interesting, going back to my childhood, right? Still a little gray hair there. You would stop the mail, you would stop the newspaper, my mom had a timer for the lights that you would turn on and off, and all intended to not make it apparent that no one's home, so someone might break in. Today, people post, I'm on my way to Cancun, I'll be there for 3 weeks, here I am on the beach or wherever, I'm not at home, I'm not, that same risks exist. And so it's interesting, having dealt with large scale, attacks and breaches on a few different places. It's also interesting as well that your attackers, if they've gained access, and that there were several months, right? I've seen the stats say upwards of 7, 8, 9 months people have access before they get discovered. Note that they're watching close enough to make sure they're not operating as you with your credentials when you're not there. And so they're actually profiling your calendar, your profiles, where you're at, so as not to inadvertently trigger something.
The other thing I would throw out, and again, you kind of hit on it, and again, I don't see a whole lot of super young in the room, like teenage here, but it is a good reminder for all of us. And again, so I have 23-year-old twins. Back when they were in those teenage Twitter, and well, not so much Twitter, but Snapchat and all that stuff was really becoming popular, and I had to remind them, ones and zeros never go away. What that picture you post of, again, you and a buddy goofing off, doing whatever, now you're sitting in front of Brent as a job interview 9 years from now, and so it's as much from the cyber and that side, just from a personal brand and a personal reputation. Take that moment, pause. I think we were talking about this earlier, the idea of would you pause before you sent that email, of take that pause, and again, it never goes away. Well, yeah, in theory, Snapchat, that picture is only on there for, I don't know, I don't use it, but I hear like 30 seconds. Everybody screen captures, so it's, they get in a little bit of this idea of false sense of security, of, well, I just only sent that to my buddy. No, he screen captured it, and then he probably texted it to his 15 friends, and then they posted it on Facebook, and now it's there forever. So outside of just the cyber, there's kind of the personal brand side of things to take into account on social media as well.
I have an email account, and that's my social media.
You only have one?
I have one.
Wow.
Yeah, that's it. It's one.
Good for you.
I have nothing. I had a LinkedIn account I think I looked at a year ago. It has my name, and I am employed, and that's the extent of it. I'm still employed, right? Where's the dean? I'm employed?
Badge still works?
Oh, God.
Yeah, that's the way to check.
Exactly.
Cyber professionals seem to speak a little different language. accountants get blamed for that too. We actually understand what things mean. You assume someone knows what you're saying. Michael's laughing. Very good. Anyways, how do you speak with management to assure they actually understand what you are saying and without scaring them, they should be, getting that risk, that level of risk across to them, how bad it can be and what kind of action needs to be taken? How do you talk to a board or upper management that aren't trained in your area?
Yeah, so I have some experience with this. So as much as I'd love to see folks from different parts of an organization come together and learn the terminology to better speak each other's languages, you have to recognize that in the end, cybersecurity, IT security risk is the same as any other risk, in that IT security professionals really should learn the language of risk in general, because it'll help them speak to business leaders, management, and so forth, and convey the appropriate level of risk, because the language is pretty much the same. When it comes to trying to take more complex topics, I always try to speak in analogies. So I used one once where I would describe a plot of land that was owned by a farmer and had a single street address, and then was bought out by a corporation and had a high-rise installed on it, to describe how network address translation works. And those of you that are familiar with, kind of a one-to-many address. And so things like that have worked, but it's really important to try to understand what you're trying to convey. Are you trying to get management or leadership to know enough about IT to be able to speak the language, or just really want them to understand, here's a big risk and we need to do something about it, and to equate that with any other risk they might be evaluating, so forth.
I think part of it is, it's kind of a two-way street to me. We have to help educate them, again, on the idea of risks and risk mitigation and those types of things, but we have to do so speaking their language. So, you can't walk into a board of directors, in my humble opinion, and start talking about malware and ransomware and network segmentation and endpoint and cloud and all this stuff. You have to talk to it in terms of their language. So I was talking to a CISO who was preparing to talk to his board in a financial services organization, and they're growing through acquisition. And their CEO has stated that cyber is the #1 inhibitor for us to growth. And so we were kind of helping build out his plan of message around, okay, how do we leverage cyber as an enabler for the business to grow through acquisition of other financial organizations. So I really think you have to understand and what the business priorities are. Again, speak the language of business, not the language of technology or necessarily as much the language of cyber sometimes. And we, again, Cisco and even at Focal Point, the three-letter acronym world, we all start throwing around, well, just set up your NAT and then get that IPS going, and at some point you'll get an MD5 hash. And so we got to get out of the techno speak and speak their language, and do so at a layer relatable and helping them drive, whether it's a CEO, a board, a line of business, even not necessarily even executive level, but if you're working with a line of business in an organization, to understand what their priorities are and speak their language.
Yeah, no, I think I completely agree with everything so that you're the chief educator. The other thing I've seen a lot of executives do is they go in without a plan. So is your plan today to educate? Is your plan today to inform, or is your plan today to drive a decision? And too often people only go in when they want the decision and then try to do all three, which is absolutely the wrong approach to that. You've got to very purposefully decide, and this requires a degree of foresight, right? You've got to understand what's going to come down the road, and you've got to understand how to plant those seeds and have those conversations and do that education. I love the analogies. I use them all the time. Put into simplistic terms people can understand. You have to speak in terms of business risk. You've got to speak. I've often said, and I've said this to people in interviews and other things I've done. I think of myself as a translator. I can speak both business and geek, and so my job is to interpret those two things and to have that conversation. But you need to be very, very focused on what conversation you're having and what's the objective here today. I'm sitting in front of the board, and I need to understand, what am I driving them to? What's my end goal? Have that very clear. Needs to be simplistic. 1, 2, no more than 3 things I'm trying to get out of this. And that message, it's often I see too many, it's IT as a whole, not just security, but it's IT as a whole. It becomes an SAT problem, right? It's this massive amount of information that's irrelevant for about half it's completely irrelevant. Might be interesting to you, they don't care. So it's that mindset of putting yourself in a board member's shoes or executive shoes. I'll tell you, the most valuable person in my company for that was my admin assistant, who I would actually sit down and talk to, and I would ask her to recite back to me what you took away from what I just said. She wasn't a cyber professional, very, very intelligent person, but wasn't a cyber professional in any way, wasn't an IT professional. And she said, I'm not sure I understood. I think I got this, but that's probably not what you're trying to get to. So sorry, I don't think I followed. I'm like, that's all I needed. My message was wrong. So take and have that sounding board of somebody outside. The first time you give a presentation, sure better not be in front of the board. And it better not be to just your peer cohorts who are going to tell you, great job, we understand it all, right? Find somebody, your cousin, your uncle, whoever it is, and then sit down and talk to them that they don't understand this, and you'll be a lot more successful.
I completely agree, and I think that's a big challenge for us because we're so passionate about technology and what we do and how we employ it in our companies, that to talk to somebody that is at a different level, we have to really understand what their value is and what our technology brings to it, and not just scaring them every time we bring something to the table.
Fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Yes. You can.
All I can think of is my daughter is brilliant at coding, but she doesn't know how to address an envelope.
Yeah.
If we could have the student assistant go around and pick up the index cards with some questions, in a few minutes we'll do some questions from the audience. This is the news this morning about with the budget between the state legislator and the governor, and cutting away about $1.2 billion. And one of the things from the governor's wish list is an increase in the cybersecurity budget, that portion. What are some issues you're having with cybersecurity budgets relative to the risk you face, as far as putting resources in place to meet those risk levels? How has your organization been reacting to that?
I think what we do is we allocate a certain amount every year towards cybersecurity. So there's usually some threat that pops up that we may be weak in an area. And so we want to just kind of shore that up a little bit. We try to keep things at a standard level, and we try to keep things, current. So we have budgets set aside, and if something unusual comes up or something that we think we need right away, the board's been more than open to discussing that with us. And obviously, as a technician bringing this stuff up, we want to make sure that we're not bringing it up because it's just cool technology, that it actually has value, that it has the right place, and that it is offsetting the risk that is there.
Yeah, I've seen more organizations. So again, we're all familiar, and I mentioned it once, the idea of people, process, and technology, and all three have to work together. You can't, again, as we've all attested, and those of you in the industry, you just can't throw technology at the problem. And for years, frankly, and again, I'll take a little blame as coming from a former tool vendor, that was kind of the mantra. Hey, I've got the new widget, again, not the silver bullet, but let's throw this technology at it. And I see more and more organizations shifting the budgets to less on the technology side and more about the people and the process. Again, we mentioned earlier the shortage of qualified, capable talent. So more people are, so how do I recruit? How do I build a recruiting program? What do I look for? What are the skills? Those types of things. And then once I have someone on board, how do I retrain? How do I retain them through, again, additional educational? How do I help them build their skill sets? I think Richard Branson has the quote of train an employee well enough that they can leave and then treat them well enough that they won't. Mm-hmm. And I see more organizations really focusing on the process and the people side and pausing on the technology budgets. We all have, for the most part, enough tools. Let's operationalize them. Let's figure out and even reduce where we can. Again, more organizations, if you look at the endpoint, your laptop, how many security clients, security agents do you have on there, and how much overlaps? I see more organizations, even in some places, trying to shrink their technology. We have too many tools. We can't manage them all. We can't patch them all. We can't update them all. We can't integrate them all. To try and simplify that and focus again a little more on the process aspect. Can we get that ability to detect from 3 months down to 2 months down to 1 month through better process and our people assets inside of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is you'll never have enough, and no matter what you do, I guarantee it's not enough. The better you get at speaking in business terms and talking about ROI, talking about the value proposition, talking about how do you help an organization move forward with some business strategy tied to that, the closer you'll get to getting closer to enough, but you'll still not get there. The important thing I see is how do you tie business development and growth and business changes into evolving cybersecurity. If you have a budget and that budget goes up by 2% a year, but the company's adding several large initiatives, you're in a world where things get interesting. But I also say it's a bit of an indictment of the industry as a whole as well. Too many times it's the easy excuse. I don't have enough, right? And so if that's your answer, I don't have enough, and so therefore I just sort of put my hands up, or I tell you I couldn't be as successful as I'd otherwise like to be, that's a cop-out too. And so there's a lot of things you can do. People, process. People and process just take time. So if you've got nothing more than time to do what best you can, but our job as professionals is to always figure out how to maximize the return on the amount of dollars, time, energy I've been allocated, and to ensure the company understands the delta between ideal and current state. Whether that's something we ever get to or not, at least I make it very clear to my executive team. Ideally, you give me $1 billion budget and I go do this. We have an X $1 million budget, and so therefore I can do this, and that means we've got a few risk areas here we'd like to shore up over the next 2 to 3 years. You should be aware of that risk, understand it. So the job is to make sure that executives understand the associated risk with whatever budget allocation they've given. If that's what they believe is accurate, then I've done my job. I've done my job effectively, and my job is to make the maximum amount of risk reduction possible with what I've been given.
I think that's actually one of the hardest things to get used to as a professional, right? Because you're like, this risk is out here and we've got to fix it, and you want to plug it up, and they're like, no, I'm okay with that. And you're like, what? Like, are you serious? And then I've got to sleep at night knowing that this is out there, but if they're okay with what could possibly happen, then I've just got to accept that.
I've actually gone so far, Brent, kind of to your comment, and thankfully not many, but I've had people within an organization basically say, no, I don't want to do that assessment because now I know there's a risk.
Ignorance is bliss.
And exactly, and I don't have the budget to address it, so I would rather not head in the sand kind of strategy, not even know that potential risk is out there, because then I'm liable. Again, to your compliancy and those types of worlds, but I have had people say, no, we're not even going to lift the covers and look and see what's going on. I'd rather not.
That
know.
lump in the carpet's just the way it was sewn together.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
You brought up cyber skill shortages briefly. What's been your strategy for solving some of the issues with the shortage of people with skills in your area? Internally grown, training, where do you find your people, and how do you develop them to fill those skill gaps?
Well, I can open up with a story. So I support a very large insurance organization out of Columbus, Ohio. And so they are very much moving to a cloud strategy. Even so far, they have their data centers up for sale. They don't want to own and operate their own data centers. They are all about the cloud. So that organization, and again, tying in the academia world, got together with a community college in Columbus. And they took about 50 to 75 of their IT people that, again, as they move to the cloud, minimizing their footprint in a physical data center, and are transitioning them over to the cyber world, to various roles, whether that's in the development world. Again, a lot of need for secure coding, the idea of SecDevOps, for those that are familiar with that term, and into their operations center, so on and so forth. So yeah, because of their reduced physical footprint in a data center, they don't need as much traditional networking IT people. They're going through the training process and, if you will, re-education process, and taking them and moving them over to help fill some of their shortage gap in their cyberspace.
Yeah, so a couple things, obviously tapped into internships, tapped into people changing careers and evolving. There's this mindset that it's a super technical, geeky, crazy, hard to understand world, and it is. It's very complex to a degree. Some of my best cybersecurity associates and leaders, their first job in cybersecurity is when I went to them and said, "Hey, I want you to come work in security." It's like, "Brent, I don't know anything about that." That's fine. What you understand, we just talked about, is people, process, and technology, right? The technology piece can get pretty complicated. You got to be pretty intelligent and have spent a lot of time studying and evolving. People and process, it's the same thing in accounting. It's the same thing in sales and marketing. I'm trying to get people to take action and do a particular thing. Somebody that understands how people work, somebody that understands very good, Lean or Six Sigma processes or those things, can be very, very solid in cybersecurity, even if they're not extremely in-depth, cybersecurity trained or a degree or whatever else it is. So to me, it's opening up diversity both in terms of people and backgrounds, I think is very important. But perspectives and education, I don't have to have the perfect cyber employee. I've seen organizations, it's a hospital group that wants to hire a medical doctor with 20 years of CISO, and let's be honest, right? That person doesn't exist, and if they do, there's like one in the world. So when you have requirements written that hard, people look at it and say, "I'll never apply, I'll never come back." You may have somebody perfect for that role that never applies, but you can't sit back and wait for them to come to you, that arrogance, so that you've got to go out and find people with the right talent that you can bring in and look beyond technology and look beyond that technical stack. And the last thing I would interview for some of those roles, especially as you get into leadership, was I want people who understand business, and that's good. If you understand business, I've got some smart technical people. They don't know how to sell their solutions. I need salespeople to go sell. We're selling our solutions. Whether we get you to not click on that email, whether we get you to fund our project, whether we get you to do whatever, that's sales, right? And that can be a number of people that have a potential to be in the cybersecurity industry inside the company.
Yeah. Oh,
Good.
yeah. So I think a lot of the things have already been said. I would just reinforce. We leverage heavily internship programs, and we also network throughout the Big Ten, so we know of a lot of other folks that have this kind of talent. I think it was a really good point about the kinds of cybersecurity requirements that we often put out there that sound mystical, and yet it really is just a lot of the things that folks do in the IT field today, right? So a seasoned system administrator knows how to patch systems and probably configure systems securely, and developers understand a lot about the kinds of tools you might need to develop, but also how to potentially evaluate and write secure code. So these are the kinds of things we try to make sure that we reflect on when we're looking for talent. We don't just try to say, here's a cybersecurity professional that's fully baked and so forth, but to rather talk about the kinds of things that we look for that are not only technical skills, but soft skills, the interest in learning, curiosity, interested in changing jobs and so forth. And then, when I think about the whole life cycle of recruiting and retaining, I always like to think about, go with your strengths. So I'm extremely proud to work for the university, and I think the Block M is really a useful recruiting tool. It's something worth thinking about when you're talking to folks and trying to encourage them to join, because I think we do a lot of innovation here, and I think we have really great professional development opportunities for folks that are interested in the field. I say all this sitting next to someone who's an OSU fan. No offense. But yeah, I like to try to leverage all of those things when looking for folks. And in the end, it's like always be recruiting is the way I look at it. Everyone I see that's got IT talent, I try to promote the exciting field that I'm in and encourage them to join us.
Earlier on, you talked a little about devices in the home. And I actually have a question about this, but also a student has a question about it, or someone in the audience has a question about this. Looking at all the stuff that people have at home, whether it's webcams, Alexa, that answers to our dog, and a variety of cameras and things listening, how do people help secure their privacy in an environment now that makes your house all of a sudden, if it's attacked, very public? What can they do?
Well, I think the first first step in that process is you decide what you will allow and what you want to have connected. So, yeah, there are no Alexas in my house, but yet I have a cell phone, I'm sure, that's listening to everything I'm saying, so somewhat of a false sense of security. I think that's the first part of it, is you decide what you're going to have. Past that, there are a fair amount of, call it corporate or vendor solutions out there that offer home use versions. And so I'll give you an example. Cisco acquired a while back a company called OpenDNS. So a DNS-based security capability. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar, DNS is at the core of the internet. When you type in yahoo.com in your browser, DNS is what translates that to an IP address so it knows where in the world to go connect to Yahoo's server. And so at that DNS layer, you can now provide some security mechanisms. OpenDNS allows anyone to connect their home network for free and send all of your home traffic up through that cloud security offering to help protect and understand where your kids are going, and again, trying to stop all the bad things. And again, that applies whether that's a human or whether that's a device, a camera, a TV, a Ring doorbell, whatever it happens to be. So I would encourage you to go out there. I know we also had touched on the need for, again, dual factor authentication. That comes in various forms. There are vendors out there that will let you use for like 3 home accounts a dual factor authentication. So you could help lock down your Facebook, your LinkedIn, those types of things. So there are more what you might think of as traditionally paid for large corporate solutions that they have home use programs that you should definitely take the time to research and to help implement to protect your home and the things in your home, just like large organizations do.
As best you can, don't rely on a password. If something's secure with a password, just understand it's not really secured. So add some other, we talked about layers, right? That's just a single layer. Add additional layers to the mix in some way, shape, or form, anywhere you have the opportunity to. So decide who you're sharing it with, decide if you trust those individuals, what you're going to share, and then take whatever steps, and there's so many, whether it's your bank, whether it's a camera, whatever. How do you secure that with something more than just a default password is absolutely horrible. So change that, but beyond change that, can you add another layer or 2 there to that, both of which add you some additional protection. So think on everything you do. The last thing is rely on just simple user ID and password. That's the most vulnerable, easiest to compromise thing, because if you share, people use often the same passwords over and over again, and you don't think about your Spotify account got hacked and it's not a big deal. But wait a minute, you share that same email and password with now your bank and your Ring system. Now that gets, people are very smart at applying those things over and over again. So adding that extra layer prevents that access, even if they compromise those other systems.
I'd say one other thing we could add to that too is to stay up on your technology. If you're going to put a camera in, then make sure that camera, check every once in a while with that camera manufacturer that they don't have a vulnerability that they've discovered and disclosed. And if you have a camera that's 5 years old, you may just want to take that thing out and put something else in. But yeah, stay up on your technology as well and make sure that there's nothing known there.
Patch.
Can you discuss a little bit about what deep fakes are, as far as and false misinformation, and what your companies or organizations do to mitigate that?
I don't think corporate America's taken it on a large scale yet. I think there's awareness that it exists, and there's a question about what it might lead to. There's a lot of discussion in the political spaces and those types of things right now, but I don't know if the companies have actively, currently strategies and things in place, technologies in place to detect those things. I think it's going to be very interesting next 5 years in that world.
We're probably at the tip of, well, not probably, we are at the tip of the spear of that, so yeah, I would agree. And it goes back to your comments earlier, Brent, about what is truth. That just obviously is gasoline on that fire to be able to discern anymore what is legitimate and what is not. So yeah, it's going to be it will be a growing problem.
There's a lot of people that work from home, and how does working from home present challenges for that employee's organization? What are some specific concerns that they have?
So I've worked from home for a number of years. I've worked in an office environment as well. I mean, I think there's challenges in both. In a home environment, how do I restrict access? Is it always on? Probably not, right? There's some type of regular recurring validation, but I want that in the office too. And those things. So I think in a world where you have so many different people outside of your company accessing, in a world where people travel regularly, regardless of where they work in an office on a daily basis, I think you've got those same challenges. So as a company, I assume what my associates are doing in the office, I assume what they're doing in a hotel, I assume what they're doing at home, has very similar risk profiles. And so I respond according with technology and process around that.
I think part of and I, like you, have probably been a remote employee for almost 20 years, so it's second nature to me. But talk with a lot of organizations that have a legacy of, call it network-based security technologies, right? Firewalls and IPS sensors and all these types of things, and that's great when your device is either inside the building and connected to the network, or if I am remote and I've got some kind of VPN in. But what do I do? How do I deal with those machines? Because again, most employees, even those that go to an office, they shut their laptop down at 5 o'clock, they go home, they eat dinner, or maybe they decide at 8 o'clock they're gonna do a little work. Well, I fire up the laptop, well, let me check ESPN. How did my beloved Buckeyes do last weekend? Or what's the score line of this upcoming game? I promised I had to get at least one comment in. But
Go Blue.
yeah, exactly. But so there's that gap between my device is up, I'm connected, I'm doing things, but I am not on the network. I haven't VPN'd in yet. And so a lot of organizations with that traditional approach of all of my security is in the network, and all of a sudden now I've got this remote device. So there's had to be an adaptation of the strategy, maybe a little bit more of SaaS tools and those types of things that can allow me to be protected regardless of where I am, whether I'm officially on the corporate network. Because again, it all boils back to that data governance plan. How do I identify where my data is? In order to do that, I have to know where my assets are, and then I have to know what those assets are doing.
There's been so many significant breaches just in the past 5 years. 133 million people's Social Security numbers and account information is out there just in one breach. To be realistic, is all our information already out there? And is protecting it almost worthless?
I don't think it's worth it, but I'm just curious for the room here, show of hands, how many people have received a notice they were included in some type of disclosure at some point in your life? I mean, so to answer your question, there's a degree out there. Is it worth protecting? Yes, I think there's the more you put out there, the worse it is. But I think that the question is, what is it? Again, having worked in healthcare for a couple of decades, you can get a new credit card. You can even go down the path to get a new Social Security number if you care enough. It's typically not some people end up doing. You can't get back information about your health. I can't. People are very sensitive to that. So if my personal health information is disclosed, I can't reset and pretend I didn't have a surgery once upon a time for whatever it was that I don't want somebody knowing about. So that you can think of what those things might be. So there's, I think it's always a reason to protect, because no matter what's out there, you still try to limit what is. But I think it gets back to that we probably don't care as much. People freaked out when their credit card got stolen once upon a time. It's now send me a new one, and it's just a pain to go back and set up all my stuff again. But we've done it so much, it's almost become routine. But there are still certain things we don't want to see out there. And there's still certain things we react to. So yeah, it's still protecting, but yes, a lot is unfortunately out.
Well, and just to add on to that, the government cares. And so again, you go back to your world of compliancy. There are very, very real fines and financial impacts to organizations for the breaches. So yeah, while yes, some of our personal and most of our personal information from that standpoint, Social Security number, credit card, if they want it, through one of the hundreds of breaches over the years, you can find it. But yeah, definitely still matters.
You talked a lot about personnel. And from my viewpoint, from the audit side, design and control systems, you can have zero controls, but good personnel stops everything. especially in the cybersecurity area, how are you assuring that you're hiring someone of a quality level from the personal side who would not take advantage of their position in a cybersecurity area? How do you check on them before you hire?
Who watches the watchers?
Yeah.
And so I think to a degree, it's back to the same process, right? So it's very rare to have an individual, again, that's economies of scale, larger companies. There are interviews, there's background checks, nothing's perfect in any way. As you get larger and larger, there's still the who's watching, there should be that degree of cross-training, there should be that degree of job rotation, especially some of those really sensitive roles where, you know, things are never singular, or they're not watched. And so we would have tools and technologies around things like monitoring database administrators. So specifically in the security team monitoring, so the database administrators have access to it and they've got advanced access, but the security team monitors what they do, whether things are running for too long, data's going out, whatever those are. So that's that segmentation. So who's monitoring the security administrators, we wouldn't allow them access to the core data on some of those things. The people that did the monitoring were not the same people doing administration because they couldn't give themselves access data. They could just simply watch for logs of transactions. That's a segregation of duties. That's an ideal state. Now, I'll say that comes with enough people you can get there, but it's in that same mindset to ask yourself how you protect against those things, and you're again the accounting side of it. You don't let somebody else do the books, deposit the checks, write the checks, you know, set up a new pay, you know, all those types of things. The same type of things have to apply in technology.
Well, and we haven't mentioned it yet, so what's a good panel without the words artificial intelligence and machine learning? But I think there is a role to be played. Again, it all ties in. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough smart people. You don't have big enough budgets. And that is an area where technology can help. Is that idea of AI and ML to be able to apply user behavior analytics. Hey, Scott came on. I normally see Scott's activity looks like X, Y, and Z. He's there 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. Why at 2 o'clock in the morning did I just see Scott take a gig's worth of data off the network? Is it bad? I don't know. It's outside the norm. So that's an example where, yeah, we're I think, as we continue to evolve, and that's still a relatively early, obviously a big buzzword, but relatively early in that space to those types of capabilities and technologies to help augment the human aspect to be able to identify those patterns that this is weird. You might want to go investigate this.
Mm-hmm. And it's really helpful for small companies, especially because I can't be there 24/7. So, you know, I may know my network really well. I may know traffic patterns really well. I could know it like, you know, airplanes taking off from an airport, and then I recognize that something's different or out of place, and I can hone in on it very quickly. I'm not there at midnight, so I may not see that. So it's just those kinds of tools have been very helpful to us.
AI has no motivation to steal yet. I want to thank the panel. Very good discussion. I especially like to thank Comcast Business for being a supporter of this event. I also want to thank Gail Reegs, Christine Dunning, and the student assistants who helped out today. Mike Callahan for being the MC. Adam Zerl and Michael Kamen, they have to put up with me. And thank you for your work, and especially the panelists with Cindy, Brent, Scott, and Dennis. It's really good to have you here, and sometime in the future we'll probably ask you to come back. Our next event is Thursday, March 19th. We're looking at how companies deal with change and how they adapt to change. And I thank you for coming today, and I hope the rest of your day is good, and hopefully you'll see you in March. Thank you.